Joseph Vacher, November 16, 1869 – December 31, 1898, was a French serial killer, rapist, and necrophile. He was contemporarily called Le Tueur de Burgers, the killer of shepherds, but upon his capture became more commonly known as the French Ripper or Ventreur du Sud-Est, the Southeast Ripper, owing to comparisons to the more famous Jack the Ripper murderer of London, England, in 1888. Vacher's scarred face and plain, white, handmade rabbit fur hat composed his trademark appearance. He killed between 11 to 46 people, many of whom were adolescent farm workers, between 1894 and 1897. Vacher was born as the second youngest of 16 children to illiterate farmer Pierre Vacher, 1810-1889, in Pierre's hometown of Beaufort, a commune 5 kilometers from Beaurepaire and 60 kilometers from Grenoble. Joseph's mother, Marie-Rose Rosalie Ravet, 1825-1882, from Lenchel, was Pierre's second wife after his first wife Virginie Didier, mother of 4 of Joseph's siblings, died in 1849, aged 30. Pierre and Rose became Joseph's parents at a relatively old age, being 59 and 44 years old respectively. Vacher had a twin brother, Yugni, who died in infancy on July 15, 1870, after choking to death on a loaf of bread that had been placed in the shared cradle by one of Vacher's older brothers. As a child, Vacher was already noted for his temper, having once shot at a group of other boys with his father's rifle for heckling him. Another incident occurred while working on the family farm, when he attempted to strangle his younger brother Louis, because Vacher thought he was slacking off while helping him push a wheelbarrow. In the summer of 1884, a 10-year-old boy named Joseph Amieux was raped and murdered inside a barn in a neighboring town, although the crime is blamed on vagabonds. Then, 14-year-old Vacher would later be suspected as having been the true perpetrator. At age 15, Vacher was sent to his widowed half-sister in St. Genis-Laval, who, overwhelmed by the task of caring for the temperamental youth, sent him to a very strict Marist Brothers school, where he was taught to obey and to fear God. Charlene then asked why he attacked Rod, a mother of 3, if he wanted young girls, with Vacher stating, "Oh, I would have much preferred to have the other one. The young girl from Gravel, that's the one I had wanted." When Plantier returned with 2 officers, Vacher was sitting near a tree, playing his accordion, and upon seeing the gendarmerie, he simply said, "If you were in my place, you would do like me, but you have women and I have none." Vacher was first charged with public indecency for attempted rape, receiving a 3-month and 1-day prison sentence. Based on Judge Fourcare's belief that the arrested tramp might be the killer he was looking for, Vacher was transported to prison St. Paul by train via the line St. Paul to Montbrison line, where he briefly escaped at the exit of La Muleteer Tunnel before he was recaptured at Perrache Station. 15 residents of Nantes, where a murder linked to Vacher had taken place, were called in, and all identified Vacher as having been in town at the time of the murder. Despite their belief that they had apprehended the man responsible, the authorities had little physical evidence that Vacher was responsible for the series of murders, and Vacher adamantly denied involvement during questioning. However, on October 7, with little apparent prompting, Vacher confessed to committing the sum of murders brought against him, first only to 8, but later 11, saying, "I have come to tell you the whole truth. Yes, I am the one who committed all the crimes you have accused me of," and that in a moment of rage. After his arrest, Vacher claimed he was insane and attempted to prove it in a variety of ways. He claimed that a rabid dog's bite had poisoned his blood, causing madness, but later blamed the quack cure he received for the bite. He also claimed he was sent by God, comparing himself to Joan of Arc. Despite his protestations, he was pronounced sane after lengthy investigations by a team of doctors that included the eminent Professor Alexander Lacassagne. He was meant to be educated there until he was 18, but expelled after only 2 years, as monks at the school noted Vacher for torturing animals and masturbation. Court documents say that investigators were able to confirm that Vacher kept close contact with sheepdogs as a child, but believed that Vacher's insistence on their responsibility for his condition actually ties back to their owner. the Commune's guard Champtre, who may have raped Vacher when he was 6 years old. He was tried and convicted by Judge Mile Fourquet of the Cour d'assises of Ain, the department where he had murdered 2 of his victims, and was sentenced to death for the murder of Victor Portelier on October 28, 1898. On January 26, 1898, Vacher broke out of his cell and seriously injured the on-duty guard by battering him with a chair before he was subdued by other staff. Vacher was executed by guillotine at 7:03 a.m. On December 31, 1898, in front of a crowd of 3,500 people, he refused to walk to the scaffold under his own power and was dragged to the guillotine by the executioners. A list of Vacher's known victims. In some of the murders, false accusations were made by local residents and the press. Not long after the discovery of Eugenie Delhomme's body, farmer Louis Frenois was arrested by police as a suspect. Eugenie Grenier, a landowner in Daix who employed victim Augustine Morcheroux and one of the men who found her, was detained for 45 days after being publicly accused by Le Bourguignon Cell and Le Bien Public, with the locals outside the jail calling for him to be lynched. Even after he was released due to lack of evidence, Grenier and his family were treated as outcasts, with suspicions still remaining after Vacher's confessions 2 years later. Additionally, Vacher is suspected to have committed serial rapes in the departments of Dromé, Puy-de-Dôme, and Isère. Rape against a female juvenile in Brud during December 1896 was linked to Vacher. During his trial, Vacher was also accused of the following murders. False arrests were made in at least 2 of the murders. A shop owner named Tholman was briefly detained for the murder of Adrien Riewillard and forced out of town by locals after he could not be tied to the scene. He found work as a restaurant worker and moved in with his sister and her husband in Marcolin. In the murder of Jean Henrien, a man surnamed Munier was incriminated by witness Montchablon for returning a day after the killing with scratches on his face. It was found that Munier had, on the day following Henrien's death, attempted to rape a young Swiss girl, who fell ill and died after the act. The judicial error accusing him of the Henrien murder led to his exoneration on both charges, after which locals shunned him and his family. A public poster published titled 52 Crimes, attributed to Vacher or confessed by him, listed his tentative offenses as 46 murders, 3 attempted murders, 2 attempted rapes and connection to 1 disappearance, though with several misspelled names and other mistakes, such as placing the murder of Joseph Amieux, who was killed in 1884, in 1894. In addition to Louise Barrant, Vacher was alleged to have made the following murder attempts. American newspapers would somewhat exaggerate Vacher's killings, reporting the high-end estimation of 38 possible victims as fact. The newspapers also named victims that are not mentioned in surviving French newspapers nor alleged by court or investigators. One of the most widely shared, yet unconfirmed cases of this kind is the supposed murder of a French nobleman named only as the Marquis de Villeplaine, who had fallen victim to a fatal robbery during a park walk near the French-Spanish border. After his execution, it was widely reported by the same sources that Vacher was a self-admitted anarchist, after proclaiming during a prison transport that he was the anarchist of God and his murders related to his oppose to society, no matter what form of government may be. Vacher's place in French social history is similar to Jack the Ripper's place in British social history. While living with them, Vacher contracted syphilis and had to have his left testicle surgically removed at Antiquail Hospital 6 months following the diagnosis. At age 18, he was reported for the attempted rape of a 12-year-old boy on a farm in Beaufort on June 29, 1888. The victim, Marcelin Borden, was pushed down while baling hay in a barn, but managed to punch Vacher and alert fellow workers to the scene. Vacher avoided a charge of pederasty as he fled town and his employers were unaware of his residence. He was evicted in 1889 by his brother-in-law due to his aggressive behavior and went to Geneva to ask to live with his brother Auguste, to whom he admitted to the attempted rape in Beaufort and possibly referenced other violent crimes he committed. After he was rejected by his brother, he lived in Lyon in 1891. Vacher was briefly confined to an asylum for voicing persecutory delusions. Seeking escape from the intense poverty of his peasant background, he joined the army in 1890, serving in the 60th Infantry Regiment. Early into his enlistment, Vacher was transferred from his initial living quarters because he kept stealing and hiding the clothes of fellow soldiers. Vacher was noted for his ill temper and aggressive behavior towards his fellow soldiers. In his first year of service, Vacher made at least 2 murder attempts on superior officers. In the first instance, frustrated at slow promotion, infused with the grandiose belief that he was not receiving the attention he deserved, Vacher made threats against Barbier, a recently promoted corporal from his unit. When Barbier arrived in Vacher's barracks to calm him down, Vacher attacked him with a straight razor. After failing to injure Barbier, Vacher instead tried to kill himself by slicing his throat in his first known suicide attempt. In another incident, Vacher tried to stab a Sergeant Fourier with a pair of tailor's scissors. He was brought to the infirmary for overnight stays after both incidents, and following the second attack, he was heard screaming, "Blood! I'll kill him. They don't know what I'm capable of." In another incident, Vacher lunged at the adjutant Sergeant Tizot with a razor when the latter confiscated a bottle of brandy from him. Despite these incidents, Vacher was promoted to corporal the same year. After reaching the rank of sergeant on December 28, 1892, Vacher was known to punish soldiers for infractions by physically beating them, once nearly strangling a man to death. One soldier, a private named Matthew, attested that Vacher kicked him in the abdomen for failing to keep a steady marching pace and threatened to court-martial Matthew. On the way to the barracks, however, Vacher took Matthew aside and admitted that he would not have a proper case against Matthew, asking him to forget about the threat. Reportedly, Vacher was also known to steal from civilians, for which he was never charged since the items were of low value. Although he served for under 3 years, Vacher would later claim to have been a non-commissioned officer with the Zouaves, which, while unsubstantiated and unlikely, was widely repeated in contemporary English-language media. Related to this, Vacher stated he had evaded arrest in 1897 by repeating this claim to a gendarme who was about to book him for running from law enforcement. Said gendarme was looking for the perpetrator in a nearby murder committed by Vacher. In the spring of 1893, while Vacher was stationed in Bessenen, he fell in love with a young maidservant, Louise Barant. After his attempted suicide led to a 4-month dismissal from the military, he invited her to a meal and proposed to Barant. During this first rendezvous she declined, because Vacher said he would kill if she betrayed in the same breath. Vacher nevertheless attempted to move in with Barant and her parents, and failing that, he stalked her while she was at work. Privately, Vacher grew paranoid that Barant had become involved with his best friend Louis Loyonet, a fellow soldier who was a childhood friend from the Maris school. Barant eventually accepted an invitation to go to a dance with him, but ran off when Vacher attacked a man who spoke to Barant during the date. Barant moved back to her mother in Baume-les-Dames, so Vacher instead began sending her love letters, again trying to court her and repeating his marriage proposal. On June 24, 1893, Vacher got into an argument with Barant as she refused to acknowledge his letters and gifts. When she told Vacher that she rejected the marriage offer, Vacher grabbed Barant from behind and took out a kitchen knife, shouting, "As good as today as tomorrow," but fled without harming Barant when he heard someone approaching. The following day, on June 25, Vacher purchased a sword stick, a revolver and ammunition, and entered Barant's residence in Bessenen. Vacher told Barant to either accept his proposal or return the letters and gifts, but before she could answer, Vacher shot her 3 times in the head with the revolver. Barant was badly injured from a shot through the mouth, which broke off 2 front teeth and grazes by both temples, but survived the shooting. Vacher then attempted suicide by shooting himself twice in the head. Vacher survived these injuries, instead paralyzing one side of his face, deforming him severely. One of the bullets remained lodged in his ear for the remainder of his life, and the damage to his brain likely exacerbated his existing mental illness. He felt that the shooting damaged him more than physically. He later claimed, after his arrest, that the reactions of strangers to this self-inflicted deformity drove him to hatred of society at large. Barant received dentistry treatment and returned to work within 2 weeks of the shooting the following July. On July 7, 1893, Vacher was confined to St. Hill Psychiatric Hospital in Dole, Jura, where he often attacked staff, destroyed furniture, and wrote letters to officials, claiming he suffered abuse there. On August 2, Vacher was discharged from the army in relation to the attempted killing, but still received a certificate of good conduct. He briefly escaped the facility on August 25, but was caught a few weeks later, though once more fleeing by jumping out of a train window while he was being transported back to Dole. When he was found and brought back 2 days later, he tried to commit suicide by repeatedly bashing his head against a wall. On December 21 of the same year, a court found him not guilty of the attempted murder of Louise Barant by reason of insanity, and he was transferred to the state-run St. Robert Psychiatric Hospital outside of Grenoble. He stayed there for 3 months until his doctors pronounced him completely cured and released on April 1, 1894. In total, Vacher spent less than 10 months in treatment. That same day, during a meeting with his former subordinate, Private Matthew, Vacher stated that he had tricked staff into the release by claiming he had suffered only temporary insanity. Vacher began murdering his victims shortly after his release at the age of 25 during a 3-year period beginning in 1894. Vacher murdered and mutilated at least 11 people, 1 woman, 6 teenage girls, and 4 teenage boys. Many of them were shepherds watching their flocks in isolated fields. The victims were stabbed repeatedly, often disemboweled, raped, and sodomized, the last 2 occasionally post-mortem. Vacher became a drifter, traveling from town to town, from Normandy to Provence, staying mainly in the southeast of France and surviving by begging or working on farms as a day laborer. Most murders occurred in what is now the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region. By most accounts, Vacher was unkempt and frightening, wandering from town to town as a vagrant in filthy clothes, begging in the streets and surviving on the scraps he received from anyone who would show him kindness. The few times he took temporary work such as shepherding from farmers, Vacher would often quit midway and still demand full payment during this time. He was twice arrested for vagrancy, but never suspected of the killings. He reportedly attributed being undetected by police to God's grace and would regularly undertake pilgrimages to Lourdes to pray to the statue of the Virgin Mary. Authorities did not make a connection between any of the killings until the summer of 1897, when newly installed Judge Mile Fourquet, who had investigated the murder of Augustin Mortereau in 1895, had judicial offices and departments across southern France collect records of unsolved murders, having concluded that a single individual was behind some of the gruesome murders reported to him due to their shared mutilation and/or victim group. On September 2, 1895, a man matching Vacher's exact description was reported in Belly, having squatted for a night at the local washhouse and become aggressive with locals, including a 10-year-old girl he tried to buy wine from with just 10 centimes and farmers who had denied him work, but offered him alms. On July 31, 1896, while in Pricey, Vacher went to the home of a ferryman named Abel Sandrin, with whom he had an unspecified dispute, and started a fist fight. Sandrin deflected each blow and retaliated with punches of his own, which left Vacher bloodied while Sandrin remained unharmed. On October 17, 1896, Vacher passed through the commune of Job, where he knocked on the house of a woman surnamed Goutbel and asked her for cheese. Goutbel turned to the kitchen to bring him some food when Vacher threw himself on her. When she returned, Goutbel tore away from his grip and ran outside to alert her neighbors. He was arrested for the assault, but eventually let go after a short stay in jail through early mid-February, 1897. Vacher lodged in Calubrac, a hamlet near Lacan, first accompanied by another vagrant named Gautrais. He stayed with 2 families, the Ferencs and the Moffers, who later identified him by photograph, wearing his old infantry fatigues. He often entertained the children of his lodgers by reading them books or showing off souvenirs from his past, including 2 large hiking sticks and a photo of a woman in miller's garb, who he claimed was his mistress, Maria Lord, a name that was also engraved on a knife and leather sheath he carried. On February 17th, he knocked on the door of Suzanne Cabral, who allowed him in to warm himself by the fireplace. Two talked amicably until Cabral mentioned that she had received a 2,500 franc inheritance from her sister in Castres. At this point, the previously tranquil Vacher stared at her with bad air, at which point Cabral shouted for her husband, who was actually away that night, causing Vacher to bolt out of the house. She was confirmed to be telling the truth as she independently noted the sergeant chevrons on Vacher's clothing. Most witnesses recalled that Vacher made frequent mention of the Virgin Mary, specifically in relation to the Lord apparitions. Also, on either 13 or February 17th, he passed through the hamlet of Carouse and rested at the house of 43-year-old Virginie Bousquet, who let him rest by the hearth for the night. She left Vacher at the house for a while to go for a walk because he made her uncomfortable with stories of crude, strange things that happened at the convents he was raised in. When Bousquet returned, she found her youngest daughter, 6-year-old Germaine, sitting on Vacher's knees. Bousquet was able to get her guest to get leave by threatening to call for her neighbors and barred the door afterwards to be safe. She asked Germaine if anything had happened, and the girl revealed that Vacher had been clutching a knife behind her back in a hand hidden between his thighs. He was sighted again on February 22nd in La Garrigue, when he stayed with family of Paul Villette, whose 11 or 12-year-old daughter he taught to write a sentence in elegant English writing. Among travelers there are often great minds and sometimes even great friends of God. Afterwards, he begged for food at the house of a miller, Madame Hugh, who first gave him soup, but went back on her offer when he did not thank her. In the ensuing argument, he insulted Hugh and ran off. Vacher went to the house of Madame Assimat to warm himself at the fireplace. While they talked, one of Vacher's canes fell to the ground, revealing a long blade inside, and frightened by this, Assimat ordered Vacher to leave. Her account was substantiated due to the matching description of the sword stick, an item Vacher was known to own, having been catalogued during his arrest for the Barant affair. On July 13th, Vacher bought a small black-white dog from a cobbler named Joseph Passas in Colombier-Lugeon, which he named Lilette. According to a family who let Vacher lodge with them for a few days in Dunars, they took him in on July 14th, after seeing him beg outside of a pub, playing the accordion while Lilette pranced around with a tamed magpie perched on her back. Although Vacher had claimed to play the accordion to the family's back in Calubrac, onlooker Vital Valenra said his tune was off-key and that he was unable to play La Marseillaise when asked. The family recalled that he was kind to the couple's 4 daughters and their friends, for whom he performed music and made funny faces. He had reportedly asked their neighbors if there were any open shepherd jobs. One of them, Madame Rankin nearby Vernou, turned him away when she asked where he was from, and he replied, with a glare, from a mental asylum. On August 2nd, Vacher was ousted from the area by locals following an incident at the farm of Gisbac near Albusier-Bac had given Vacher some stew, which Vacher then tried to share with his dog Lilette. When the animal did not eat, Vacher said, "If you don't want to eat this, I will kill you," before grabbing Lilette and throwing her to the ground until the dog's head caved in, doing the same to his pet bird. Bac gave Vacher a shovel to bury the animals before telling him to leave in the morning hours of August 4th, 1897. Vacher tried to assault Marie Hrod gathering wood and pine cones in a field in Champis. She fought back, and her screams soon alerted 2 of her children, as well as her husband, 31-year-old Sraffin Plantier, who came rushing to her aid. Although Plantier was of slight build and shorter than Vacher, he fought off the attacker and pelted him with 2 stones. The commotion was heard by 4 neighbors, also collecting cinder, who rushed to Plantier's aid and restrained Vacher. As the men escorted him to the residential area, Vacher told a different tramp as they passed, "Look, I wanted to have a quickie, they wouldn't let me." They locked him in a shed at a nearby inn, with Dupercharlin, the homeowner, and the 4 neighbors keeping watch as Plantier left with his wife to get police from the station in Saint-Pré, leaving the men to guard Vacher for the next 6 hours. Charlene would later recall that Vacher spouted all manner of obscenities at them and ranted about how he had rights and wanted to exercise them on all women. When Charlene joked that Vacher should pay for the personnel, get married, Vacher took the statement serious, saying, "No, I have as many rights as anyone over all women and I want to use them." When Vacher noticed Charlene's wife and children were in the house, he exclaimed "Lagars, the bitch," and continued to scream vulgar insults for the next hours, refusing to interact further with Charlene outside of spitting at him when he got close. Vacher would attempt twice to escape the shed, being prevented by Charlene, who would kick him back at one point. Vacher asked for a drink. Charlene gave him a glass, and while in the process of filling it with fresh water, a few drops landed on Vacher's shoe. This resulted in Vacher throwing the glass in Charlene's face, who reciprocated by hitting him with the metal water jug and kicking him to the ground. While Vacher proceeded to threaten Charlene and his family with death and torture once he got out of prison, Charlene asked why he didn't just hire prostitutes instead of attacking random women, to which Vacher replied, No, I respect myself more than you do. I don't want the ones you talk about. I need young girls, shepherdesses, or cowgirls."